As we mentioned, President Biden is calling for billions of dollars in aid for Ukraine and Israel. He addressed the Israel-Hamas war and the need to support America's allies. He also acknowledged mistakes by the U.S. in past conflicts in the Middle East and cautioned Israel not to be blinded by rage. I want to bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang, who was at the White House. Weijia, what message does the president's address send? Is the administration hoping to the rest of the world about the U.S.?
Well, he's hoping to say that the U.S. is the leader of the world, that it is remaining someone that can continue to work with allies. In fact, this is something that he said as soon as he took office. I remember very distinctly, Jeff, he said, America is back. Diplomacy is back at the center of foreign policy, which is exactly what we saw from the president today. But there is a split screen unfolding because President Biden said he was going to formally ask Congress for this massive aid package that we've been talking about for $100 billion that includes money for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for border security. But it's impossible to approve that money, Jeff, without a functioning Congress and a Speaker of the House. And so that is what other nations are also seeing right now, is this chaos among the American Congress, unable to elect a leader. But the president wanted to convey that it was here and not going to turn its back on allies. And I think, more importantly, he tried to stress what would happen if we did. This was not only about Israel and Ukraine. It was about Iran. It was about China. He said if we leave our allies behind, would-be aggressors are watching, and they are seeing that America is willing not to completely follow through here. And that is why he says this is a much bigger national security risk. That's why he says we need to continue funding both of these countries. This is really sensitive, though, right now, Weijia, because Israel has been top of mind and the war with Hamas for good reason for 2 weeks now. And this is the president really trying to pull attention back to Ukraine. As I mentioned with Ed here, he spent as much, if not more time tonight talking about Ukraine than he did Israel. So how is the administration trying to strike that balance as they make that pivot? It's delicate. It's very delicate. And, you know, it's important to note that before this conflict broke out in the Middle East, Republicans were very wary already of approving any more Ukraine funding. And now, as we mentioned, the White House is hoping to tie Ukraine funding to Israel, among other things. And Republicans are already calling this out and saying that, you know, that's not how this should be done, and we will not support it. You should not be tying these two things together to try to get it over the line. But the way the president views it, it's actually not two different things, because he would argue at the end of the day, again, it is all about national security. It is all about making sure that neither one of these conflicts expands and balloons and turns into a situation where the U.S. has to become involved even more. But you're right, this is a tough case. Even if there were a Speaker of the House, even if lawmakers were able to vote on this package that is going to be formally unveiled tomorrow by the White House, you know, it's very hard to say whether they would have the votes to actually approve it, because right now, especially among Republicans, there's no appetite to be spending this kind of money. And so there's a long way to go before this package or anything that resembles it is stamped and approved and funding starts to go out. Very quickly before we let you go, Weijia, I just want to ask you, Ed, I was struck by the president comparing Putin to Hamas. I wanted to get your reaction to that. I'm sorry, comparing what to Hamas, Jeff? Putin to Hamas. Yes, Putin to Hamas. As he tied these two things together. Yes. He said it's because they have one common goal, and that is to annihilate. Annihilate is the word he used and repeated, a neighbor. And so that is why he is drawing these comparisons and conclusions and saying that even though obviously the circumstances in these conflicts in Russia and the Middle East are very different, the goal by the aggressor is the same. And so that's why he says the U.S. needs to wake up and be there for its allies, because if either one of those countries were to lose, it could spill over into a much bigger conflict that involves the world.
Okay, Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, thanks very much. We're going to bring in CBS News' Tina Kraus now. She is in Tel Aviv. Tina, I know we haven't been able to get full reaction to how Israelis feel about the president's speech tonight, but they are reacting to his visit to Tel Aviv. How do they feel about that?
Absolutely. Well, Israelis told me that for the 7 hours that President Biden was on the ground here in Tel Aviv, they felt a sense of hope, a hope that they could get through this nightmare that began on October 7th and continues as the families of these hostages wait to get their loved ones back. They say that having the U.S. on their side makes them feel good, that they are able to move forward and know that President Biden is going to get this unprecedented package to help Israel defend itself. So, you know, having the most powerful nation in the world here on their side is something that they're very glad about.
The president, this meeting with Arab leaders, as you know, was canceled in part because of the strike that happened at the hospital. And even though the Israelis were not behind that, there's been a lot of controversy over that. But the president is still attempting to make clear, as he did in this speech tonight, that he's still speaking with these leaders, even if he's not meeting with them in person.
Yeah, exactly. And he wants to make it clear that Hamas is Hamas. The Palestinian people are something else. And he was hoping to be able to go to those Arab countries, but he still has been speaking with them to know that the Palestinian people here have just the same rights as well. He wants them to know that Israelis and Palestinians, he still said tonight that he hopes that there will be peace, that there hopes there will be a two-state solution. He brought that to the table in the speech. So, yeah, I mean, that's the message, that both sides deserve good treatment.
From what you're seeing and hearing on the ground, Tina, I just wonder how things have you seen things change over the past 12 or 13 days?
Well, in the time that I've been here, I have heard a lot more air raid sirens. I've seen a lot of rockets coming this way from Gaza. And I think that there is just a real sense from Israelis that I'm talking to that they want this ground invasion to begin. They want to get in there to, frankly, get revenge for what has happened and to get these hostages back. And they've got a real job ahead of them, Israeli troops, as you know. I mean, they're parked now with their tanks at the border. They're waiting for the order to roll. And once they go in, the Gaza Strip is 25 miles long. It's a huge place that is so densely populated, and it's full of this sophisticated underground fortified tunnels that Hamas operates within. It's known as the Gaza Metro. So getting in there and finding these hostages is going to be a long and painstaking task. It's going to take a lot of patience, a lot of intelligence. We know that the Pentagon also sent in a team of special ops forces to help Israelis pinpoint the location of these hostages, but it's going to take time and a bit of luck to bring them home.
Okay, Tina Kraus in Tel Aviv, thank you so much. We want to bring in Gerald Firestein now. He is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. He was also a 41-year career diplomat who served in 7 nations, including Yemen, where he was U.S. Ambassador. Ambassador, thank you for your time. Let me just start with this. The president's speech tonight, what did you make of it? Were you surprised by anything?
It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, Jeff. No, I think that the president's speech was pretty well previewed, that we knew where he was going to go with this. I think one thing that I was pleased about was the emphasis he placed on the Palestinian issue as well as the Israeli issue, that it can't only be about Israel responding to this Hamas atrocity, but it also has to do with trying to protect innocent Palestinian lives, to make sure that humanitarian relief gets into them, but also to try to limit the Israeli operations so that we don't have a lot of Palestinian casualties.
Ambassador, the Biden administration has not paid much attention to the Middle East until this happened. Was that a mistake?
Well, the old saying is that we may want to move away from the Middle East, but the Middle East doesn't want to move away from us. And so there is this issue that not only this administration, but its predecessors, with the pivot to Asia, the idea that the concerns that the U.S. should be confronting are in Russia and China, and that the Middle East really was not an area where the U.S. could make significant progress. I think, unfortunately, there has been an abdication of responsibility by successive U.S. administrations to try to address the fundamental issues that divide Israelis and Palestinians, that really is underlying all of these explosions of violence that we're seeing.
Why is that? Because do some of these administrations just say, we give up?
I think that there was a sense that the parties were not prepared on either side, that there was no quote unquote partner for peace in either Israel or the Palestinian territories, that neither side was prepared to make the compromises, and that therefore there was really no prospect. John Kerry tried very hard in the Obama administration to try to get some agreement, to try to get some progress, without much success. So this is, I think it's, frankly speaking, an issue that successive administrations have looked at and said this is a loser.
Ambassador, do you think it's going to be problematic for the Biden administration to tie aid for Israel to aid to Ukraine?
Well, I think that fundamentally my own sense, and your correspondent in Washington probably has her finger on the pulse more than I do, but my sense is that the president will get the funding, that he will win the battle. I think that on both the Republican and Democratic sides, there is support for both Israel and Ukraine. But there's also a fundamental difference, which is that in Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, ultimately what we need to do is get back to a political process. There's not a military solution. Whereas in Ukraine, I think the fundamental objective is that we have to give the Ukrainians what they need in order to achieve a military victory that forces the Russians to withdraw.
Ambassador Gerald Firestein, we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go back to CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe for some final thoughts here. Ed, how quickly does the administration want to try to get this funding package through?
Well, we anticipate now that they will formally send it to Congress tomorrow morning. And again, it's expected to include a suite of global security concerns, but also domestic ones. Don't be surprised to see funding in there for disaster relief, like the fires in Hawaii or other anticipated natural disasters in the coming weeks. There may be some other requests for domestic concerns, like the so-called child care cliff, or the aid that's been going to families to pay for child care. This is designed to be an emergency spending plan. That's what they call it in essence, and designed to also get Congress and the White House through next year's election so that Congress and Washington generally doesn't get mired in this kind of stuff at the height of an election season that's already set to be so tumultuous. So again, it'll depend on how quickly there's a speaker. It'll depend on how quickly Republicans, once they've reorganized in the House, can get together with Republicans in the Senate and figure out what to them is acceptable. To your question about how quickly can this move and is it smart to put all this together, certainly the White House and Democrats think so, and there are some Republicans who agree. Better to just do this all in one big package. But there will be holdouts, conservative holdouts, who say, no, this is the kind of stuff we shouldn't be doing anymore in Washington because it's expensive. There isn't enough accountability. We'll see how the debate goes, but it's not going to be over anytime soon. Just as this war in the Middle East is going to continue to rage, just as the situation in Ukraine continues to play out, getting Washington to agree on some basic things remains a real domestic challenge and one that isn't going to get solved anytime soon.
Speaking of conservative holdouts, if people keep lunging at Matt Gaetz or Kevin McCarthy or whatever happened there behind closed doors, I don't mean to, it's not to laugh at it, but it is pretty striking how Republicans have a difficult time, to say the very least, coming together here to find a speaker. As long as that continues, none of this goes forward?
No. I mean, the Senate can certainly try in a bipartisan fashion to begin moving this big proposal from the president, but even there you'll find some resistance. And even if they were to pass it, say, in the next 3 weeks, which is still a tall order for the Senate, what's to say the House will be organized enough yet to get it done? And we can get really technical here for a second. Does this become the vehicle that also keeps the government open? Because remember, the deadline's coming just before Thanksgiving. Or is this going to be done separate of that as just emergency funding? And then we'll also have a separate fight on whether or not to keep the lights on across the federal government. That's the trickiness of what the president and congressional leaders, whoever they are, will face in the coming weeks. And it's just, again, an example of how perilous American politics have become, and how the world watches this and says, how can we trust the United States to be, you know, that stable, able ally if they're squabbling amongst themselves over issues like this? We'll see.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, Ed, because McCarthy lost his speakership in large part because he wanted to keep the government open. Right. And then Jim Jordan was saying, if I'm not incorrect here, that he also wants to keep the government open, and now he's having the problems.
Exactly. And it's you know, that small group of conservative lawmakers that are tying this up, it would appear. And we'll see. And, you know, God forbid things get worse in either of these conflicts or something unforeseen happens and we still have this stalemate. One wonders if it will compel Republicans to get it done faster or whether it's just going to make the crisis that they're facing so much more acute to everyone else.
Ed, you and I have both been around long enough to know the unforeseen always happens.
Yes, it does.
Ed O'Keefe, always great to see you. Thanks for your time.
Take care.